Coach, The Triumph and Tragedy of Notre Dame Legend, Frank Leahy, from Ivan Maisel. Here's a copy of the book. I appreciate the fact it was sent to us, and Ivan Maisel, who's authored many books before, has joined us before. How'd you get this idea? You pick some. So, I mean, this makes sense after reading it, but just how did these ideas come to mind?
Well, thank you, David and Paul, for having me. This idea came out of the research I did for the 150th anniversary of college football in 2019. Yeah, I noticed that Frank Leahy, when he retired in 1953, had the second best winning percentage in the history of the game to Newt Rockne, who he played for. And when I looked at the list in 2019, and when I looked at it again this morning, he's still second to Newt Rockne. So I thought, boy, that's nobody knows who he is. Then I looked to see when he was elected to the College Football Hall of Fame, and it took him 13 tries to be elected. And what I came to learn in my research is that the other coaches didn't like him, so they just wouldn't vote him in. And but it had nothing to do with his talent. And in fact, there was more than one of them who said it. You know, it was because he beat everybody so badly that they just didn't like him.
So when you think about the life of Frank Leahy and what he brought, I mean, like after Newt Rockne, it's really hard to be the guy who follows the person who is probably synonymous with the explosion of college football. Like Newt Rockne's the guy who lit the spark. And then Frank Leahy, because he had to coach his first couple years, you know, right before World War II and then stopped for a little while and came back. How much does just his timeline affect the fact that we don't think of him as much as we do someone like Newt Rockne?
Oh, Paul, I think that's got a lot to do with it. I think Rockne lives on and remains prominent in part because of President Reagan, in part because of the movie that President Reagan was in. But look, nobody remembers, anyone from the before and after the World War II era. I mean, just look at the AP all-time All-America team that came out last week. You know, the oldest player, I think, dated to the 50s. But in his day, and that was really my point, you know, Frank Leahy was a huge person on the American sporting scene. And I think you can make the case, which I tried to make in the book, that before Leahy, the success that Rockne had didn't necessarily belong to Notre Dame. It may have just belonged to Rockne, you know, just in the way that, you know, one coach had great years. But Leahy's success, which was as great as Rockne's against tougher competition, to me cemented Notre Dame as the place where great college football is played and where great college football tradition is made. You know, there's been more than one coach that has had this kind of success. And I think because of Leahy, Notre Dame became Notre Dame.
In the book, he admits that he went to Notre Dame, and a lot of guys did because of Newt Rockne. And that it seemed to me, Ivan, am I right or wrong, that Rockne kind of liked him, but wanted to make sure he didn't know how much he liked him because he was tough as hell on him too.
Well, Rockne was tough on all of them, but Rockne's great gift, David, was he liked people and he knew how to communicate. They used to make the comment that when Rockne beat the stew out of somebody after the game, he'd throw his arm around the coach and make a joke and, you know, get the guy laughing. And gee, Rockne was a great guy. And, you know, when Leahy beat you, he'd step on your chest on the way off the field. I mean, Leahy did not have that personality that Rockne had. Leahy was a bit of an introvert. And all he thought about day and night was how to win a football game. And that, I think, was a big reason why he burnt out in his mid-40s.
Well, he wrote a book about the power T, and knowing, you know, the little that I do about him and the research I did, going into this interview, it seems that his personality would be not necessarily to write a memoir, but to write a book about this is how you run this offense and this is how we did it. And not some kind of, like Newt Rockne, would have sat there and regaled you with tales of games past and all these different things. Frank Leahy's like, no, the guard lines up here, the tackle lines up here, the wide receivers right here. The rest of that stuff didn't seem like he would have cared about it.
No, he never really. He actually started work on a memoir that fizzled, and that manuscript is in the archives at Notre Dame, so that helped me a great deal. There's only about 65, 70 pages of it, but he was a guy that really only thought about football. And his son Fred, who is sixth of his 8 children, and who is still alive and doing well, and in Arizona, said a few years ago that Dad belonged to the world and Mom had 8 kids. Leahy traveled all over the country when the season ended, going to coaching clinics and promoting Notre Dame, and it's really all he thought about and all he did.
Was he a happy guy?
That's a good question. Not in the sense that he, as I said, he wasn't a people person.
Right.
I think he was happy when he won a football game and when he was doing something that would contribute to winning a football game. His coaching career ended at the age of 45 because of his health. The stress just became too much for him. And he really groped about the last 20 years for something to do that would be as fulfilling as what he had done up to that point. And he never really found it. He tried to get back into coaching. His health wouldn't allow it. It's particularly at Texas A&M, which hired him, and then he had to beg out. He got into football administration. He got into the business world, which turned out to be pretty well a disaster. And then he just became a public speaker and ranted about communism, as what plenty of people did in the late 50s, and throughout the 60s, but never found anything that made him as happy as winning a football game.
He drives or he gets on a train in the snow to get to Notre Dame. But here are some other things that I wrote down, I circled. He took a job crushing rocks for a contractor. And again, it's a different time. There's another one that says he helped plant at a plant covered pipes with asbestos for $75 a week. He manual labor, carrying 100-pound sacks of dry goods. I know that might have been the time, but he must have been one tough son of a bitch.
Well, he absolutely was, David. And I mean, think about this. He was born in a little town in Nebraska in 1908, and his dad moved everybody to the South Dakota prairie when before Frank's first birthday. He spent his first winter in a tent on the South Dakota prairie. So he came from some pretty tough stock. He became an accomplished rider / cowboy as a kid, really, and did that a lot during the summers. And he was driven, and part of that was to prove to his father that he could make a life in football. His father wanted him to be a boxer, which he didn't want to do, and part of it was because he had an older brother, Gene, who had been a very good football player at Creighton University in Omaha, and Gene mentored him until he got to Notre Dame. And he wanted to prove to Gene that he could do it because Gene had done so much to help him. And that's really what kickstarted him.
I find it interesting that you said that he, in his public speaking career, that he would rant about communism and all these things. If I, in 1962, hired Frank Leahy to come and speak to my group, I'd be a little disappointed if he got into communism. Was that just, I want to hear football talk, not necessarily what he thinks about the Ruskies. Did that change a lot of perception about him too? Is that like, oh, this is kind of a crabby, cranky old man at this point?
Well, I think he mixed football into it, Paul.
Yeah.
And I think in the '60s the proper pronunciation was Ruskies.
Ruskies.
No, I'm kidding. I think he would do both, but he took it very seriously. That as a lot of people did in that day and age, that this was a threat. He was a pretty conservative guy, and was a close friend and golfing buddy of President Eisenhower. And he, in fact, seconded his nomination at the 1956 Republican National Convention in San Francisco. So that's the way he leaned, and anything that Leahy believed in, he believed in wholeheartedly. So he was very concerned about American youth. Every generation thinks the generation that's coming after them is soft. And he thought that, and he was going to be determined to do something about it.
Did Leahy know that Rockne thought that he was going to be the greatest college football coach of all time?
He heard Rockne brag about him, if you believe the stories. I mean, some of the stories I thought, David, were a little thick. I think some of them were I use the word schmaltz, that they just were laid on a little thick. And there was one anecdote that I read in 4 different stories over a period of about 5 years, which told me that the sports information director at Notre Dame was the one repeating the anecdote. And Lord knows if it was true or not, about Rockne bragging on Leahy. But Leahy told one story that after his senior year, Rockne took him to the Mayo Clinic. Rockne needed to go for his issues, and Leahy had blown out his knee as a senior and hadn't played. And while they were there, it was in Minnesota, and the Minnesota head coach, Fritz Chrysler, came up to the Mayo Clinic to see Rockne. And Rockne said to him, "This is Frankie Leahy. He's got a great football mind. He's going to be a great coach someday." And Chrysler, by the time Leahy became the coach at Notre Dame, Chrysler was at Michigan, and those two really butted heads.
Was Leahy as good of a developer of coaches as a lot of the guys who were in his regard as a head coach were? Did he have a good coaching tree in your opinion?
No, not in the way that some guys have had, like Bryant and Saban and John McKay, and the whole Hal Mummy, Mike Leach tree. Leahy's staff at Notre Dame stayed pretty static. There weren't a lot of guys who left, and the guys who left to become head coaches had some success, but not really notable success. And I think that speaks to the force of Leahy's personality and how driven he was.
So was the Gipper speech actually true? I get a conflicting of whether or not that actually was something he gave, but I thought I've heard audio with that.
Well, Leahy was in the locker room when Rockne gave it. That was Leahy. That was 1928. Leahy was a junior. They were playing Army in New York, and Leahy was in the locker room. That season, he was able to play a little bit. He hurt his elbow, and he actually limited him to about half the season. But he came back for that game, and he always swore that it was a real stem winder of a speech, as we all came to learn.
Ivan Maisel with us. The book again, American Coach: The Triumph and Tragedy of Notre Dame Legend Frank Leahy. Paul,
how much of this is a great time, Ivan, to write a book about Notre Dame, because it seems that they're back on the rise again with Marcus Freeman. Do you take that into consideration, or is that more of the publishing company's deal about let's put out this book about Notre Dame while they're good again and people might be interested in the past?
Well, I would love to take credit for that, Paul, but the fact is I started working on this book 3 years ago. So I had an inkling that that Marcus Freeman would turn Notre Dame around, but they were pretty good under Brian Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
So they were prominent, and let's face it, Notre Dame is Notre Dame, and they are one of a handful of schools that has a national presence in what has been for 156 years a regional sport. So if you want to write something that will appeal to people across the country, there's really only those schools. Those schools are a good start. The Notre Dames, Michigans, Ohio State, Alabamas, et cetera. And even at that, I don't think there's anybody like Notre Dame. And it just all kind of came together. I thought Leahy had a story to tell that had been forgotten. Notre Dame is Notre Dame. And then the fact that they made, they're a national contender again is just dumb luck. For me, anyway.
The national brand, and you mentioned schools. Texas is probably in that group too.
Yes.
But we're getting away from that, Ivan. We're getting away from it's with all this explosion of realignment, and how you'd cover the game for a long time, still do. What are your thoughts about where we are right now with college football and athletics?
Well, it's funny when you write, when you want to write a book, there's a formulaic thing you do. You write it's called a book proposal, and you have a sample chapter, and you do a summary of each other chapter and how you plan to market it and so forth. And then you shop it among publishers. And the Grand Central Publishing, which is an arm of Hachette that I had written a book for before, the editor called me and said, well, college athletics is in upheaval. Why aren't you writing a book about that? It would be timely. I said, well, actually, it wouldn't be timely, because in the 9 months between when I gave you the manuscript and when you published the book would be obsolete.
Yep.
Things are changing so fast. I think it's, I just think it would be foolish to try to write a book right now about what's going on.
Yeah, it would almost be like you make something to eat, and then like, hold on, we're gonna wait for this. Like, well, it's spoiled, right? Like, why this pie was good? Well, okay, that was a long time ago. It's not anymore.
It's like it's like when the newspapers now.
Yeah,
because by the time they print in the morning, you get it right. It's old news. We've already known about it for 12 or 16 hours.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Did you find? What I think is interesting. If you go back to the beginning, the Rockne times of college football, when they were trying to figure out what the rules were, like what they should do, especially in the very early on. Teddy Roosevelt, 20 years before that, had to make everybody get in a room and determine if forward passes were going to be legal, and how how you're going to call penalties to make sure that people don't die during this game and all of that. And then that was even before you start recruiting and bringing guys in as it got popular. There are certainly some ties to then and now, in that it seemed that at both times, even the people who should know what they're doing don't completely know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's been one constant throughout the history of the game, hasn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Look at where we are now. Everybody's groping for answers.
Well, the Big Ten's trying to get a 400 team playoff or something, like everybody's in kind of a thing. And that, like, it's just so bizarre that we went from, we can never have a playoff, this sport doesn't support it, to let's let everybody in the playoff no matter what.
Well, look, you've now put me in the middle of a minefield, because I'm on the college football playoff selection committee.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
When those questions come, I'm supposed to give only name, rank, and serial number. So
come on. Yeah, we've had, like Mac Rhodes. We see, at Baylor, among other, we've had the guys that have served that before, and I can't even imagine. I mean, that's but yeah, you did well. You handled that question from Paul very, very well.
Yeah.
So I got this. I think his brother is the one that perhaps Gene made this comment, and I saw this. If you know at least one person truly believes in you, You're going to die before you'll let him down. Is that the way that Leahy also wanted to pass that on to his players?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He pushed them really hard, David, but he built their trust in him, no matter how hard he pushed them, and they loved him. They all came back toward the end of his life when he still hadn't made it into the Hall of Fame. Notre Dame had this huge testimonial dinner on campus. It was in January of 1969, 15 years to the day after his resignation. And he had nearly 150 former players come, and they all wanted him to know what he had meant to him, what he had meant to them. And then in the 90s, as they were aging, they got together and raised the money for the statue of Leahy that now stands outside Notre Dame Stadium. So they clearly loved him and believed in him.
I told you before Paul jumped in, I was like, when I got the book and when I was contacted about it, I'm like, I forgot about how much success he had, even though I remembered the name. And then, of course, I mentioned Rockne and others and Parsegian and others. But how would someone who played for him, knew him, family or not, how would they look at the way you wrote the book? Are they thrilled that you were able to kind of tell his story?
I would hope so, and I hope their children respond that way. I mean, I have of Frank and Florence Leahy's 8 children, 4 are alive, and 2 of them are in good health. And Fred, who I brought up earlier, has been my liaison to the family, and Fred is the one I went to see when I first had this idea, because he and I had an email friendship just because he's a college football fan. And I went to see him and said, "Hey, I wanted to write about your dad." And he was grateful and helpful. And I sent him the manuscript, and he was again grateful. And he pointed out a couple things that I worked on. But they, I think he's thrilled, and I think the family is thrilled that I'm bringing Frank Leahy back in front of people again.
Paul, before you have another follow-up, I was going to, just for those that don't know, I'm sorry, he was 107, 13-9, 9 ties. He also had 6 teams that went undefeated, won 4 national titles in 11 years. That's very much Saban-like with what he did at Alabama. Paul?
Is that the tightrope when you're writing a biography, is to be authentic, but also respectful? Because sometimes, you can maybe, writers can fall down a rabbit hole of one negative aspect of a person's life, and then it doesn't maybe tell the full story, or it's distracting to the rest of it.
No, you're right. Paul, it's a judgment call. I mean, you want to present the person as they really were, and that's going to include flaws. And Frank Leahy had his flaws, and I think they're in the book. But I kept thinking to myself, of all the great leaders, certainly in the 20th century, and if you want to go back farther, whose flaws we have come to learn, and yet we still revere them. You can pretty much pick a presidential name out of the hat in that case. Certainly athletes, we've learned we're not all saints, and yet we still feel about them. We still look up to them in a way, and I think it just makes them more human. And that was sort of the light I tried to follow as I wrote the book.
Many times honored by the Football Writers Association of America. The pipeline, and you were at the Dallas Morning News over the years, Ivan, of the great columnists, analysts, broadcasters, whoever. We knew Randy Galloway. We still know Randy Galloway, and I know he eventually moved on. And then Frank Luxa or Blackie Sherrod. What was it like? I could keep on going on. What was it like to be a part of that fraternity?
It was a treat. a real treat. I got to the morning news when I was 27 years old, and really didn't know my behind from third base, but I learned a lot from those guys. I tried to listen a lot when they started talking, because they were all great storytellers, as good journalists tend to be, and it was just a real treat. You didn't have to reach back too far. I mean, Blackie was directly connected to Dan Jenkins and Bud Shrake and all those great Texas voices. So it was a thrill, and the morning news staff still gets together in Dallas, and when I try to time my visits to Dallas, when there's usually monthly or semi-monthly lunches, and Dave Smith, who was our sports editor, is still in great health and comes, and it's just a thrill to see everybody.
Ivan, where and when can they get the book?
The book will be released on September 16th. You is certainly available for pre-order up to September 16th on Amazon or at your independent bookstore. Wherever you can buy a book, it's available. And I will be, because I'm going to Dallas regularly in the fall for the selection committee, I've got an appearance in Terabang Books scheduled in November. And I'm hoping to come down to other places like Houston or anywhere that'll have me. So
do me a favor and make sure that they give us your schedule about that appearance so we could put it back up on the screen during our afternoon podcast. Again, here's the book. I was fortunate to get one of the copies. This is advanced reading copy. It was fantastic. And one of those books where you start to read it and you can't, like, I am tired, and I just kept wanting to know and learn more and more. And of course, always remember the great book and the experience with Max, your son, and how you opened your heart up to so many people, which was awe-inspiring and amazing. Ivan Maisel, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations on a man that a lot of people don't remember enough about, and maybe they will now know about, Frank Leahy. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys.